How's it going, everybody? I had a video planned this week that was different than what I'm going to be doing today. I rewatched it and I realized that I just really don't like how it came out and I don't have time to re-record it, so I'm giving you something a little bit different for now until I can figure that out. But I've been thinking this week a lot about the idea of being well-read. You hear that term a lot on the internet these days, and with the internet today, I've been thinking it's really incredible how well trained just lay people or just random people on the internet are in philosophical vocabulary, theological lingo and vocabulary and terms. People just, they understand the development of theology in just an incredibly intimate way. And it's really something else when you talk to someone on X or you talk to someone in Discord or forums online. It's like, wow, people really know their stuff. You always see videos or forums or articles about being well read. What does it mean to be well read? And a lot of times, at least in the Reformed side of the internet, but I think every Christian tradition kind of deals with this. People are really good at reading the theology in their tradition or just theology in general. And that's their diet. They just read theology, 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 theology. It's like in the Reformed tradition, of course, you usually start somewhere here with John Calvin, Institutes of the Christian Religion. Not an easy read, but a lot of people start here. This is just something that's considered like, if you haven't read this book, you aren't well read in the Reformed tradition. Other things like this is Stephen Charnock, one of my favorites. I love Stephen Charnock. The Existence and Attributes of God, a scholastic dissertation on theology proper, God's character, his attributes, what makes God God, divine simplicity, things like that. And then another big one is The Institutes of Eclectic Theology by Francis Turretin. And so we just read these, and then you get into more secondary sources. You have guys like Joel Beakey, Louis Berkhoff, Herman Bavinck. Start at the Institutes of the Christian Religion and just keep going and going and reading nonstop. You'll never get to the end as long as you live. It doesn't matter. What I want to point out today is that this really seems to be where a lot of people online live. But if you read guys like, the person who comes to mind is Michael Horton. Michael Horton, when you read his stuff, I'm thinking of his book, what's it called? His systematic theology. It's called The Christian Faith. I think it's called The Christian Faith, a Systematic Theology for Pilgrims on the Way. And when you read his stuff, he's an evangelical. I believe he's part of a schismatic denomination, but it really he just gives you the impression that he not only knows theology very well, but he knows the world where theology lives and the world that the theology that we're reading came from. And he just seems to understand all the different perspectives in a very intimate way. And I guess my point with all this is that really seems to be where we're missing out in a lot of these discussions online, be it Catholics, Lutherans, Anglicans, and Reformed people. I think we all do this, where we really we know our own theology and then we know somewhat of the theology of the differing perspectives of which we're opposed to. And that makes for interesting debates and entertaining YouTube videos and the opportunity to talk to people in YouTube comments and on X and things like that. But I really want to urge people watching this video, if you really fancy yourself a well-read theological thinker, even as a layperson such as myself or someone who wants to maybe have an academic career or be a pastor or something like that, if you really fancy yourself a theologian, like I said, lay theologian or a professional theologian, I believe you have to have a holistic diet. When you think about a well-read person, I think about a well-fed person. So what is a well-fed person? Is a well-fed person someone who spent a couple weeks at a buffet and just ate 3,000 calories every single day and just fattened themselves up and then they didn't eat ever for the rest of their life? No, that's not a well-fed person. That person is probably 65 pounds. A well-read person, in the same way that a well-fed person is well-fed, is someone who has a balanced diet, in my view. Someone who not only has a balanced diet and reads broadly, but someone who continues to read broadly throughout their life. They're never truly done reading, and always kind of branching out, always trying to invite different perspectives into their reading diet. And of course, being anchored to what you deem to be healthy. For me, it's the Reformed tradition. I want to really understand the Reformed tradition really, really well. So probably 30 to 40% of what I read is Calvinist authors, because that's what I believe to be the truest, well, I guess in Catholic terms, the fullness of the truth. So that's what I read a lot. But I am someone who, I just like reading in general. So I think I have something a little bit different to say about this. Whereas, like, I like to read fiction, I like to read philosophy, I read all sorts of stuff. And right now, I'm in a season of my life where I'm working on a degree. I'm overloading my classes. I don't have time to read a 600-page systematic theology text from a 17th century Reformed scholastic. I just don't have the time. I can read a little bit of it. And the reason is because I'm reading so much history for my history classes, and I'm reading philosophy, and I'm reading all sorts of other stuff, the different classes that I'm doing. I spend so much of my time reading that it's like I'm a father and a husband and a homeowner too, so I have lots of stuff to do. Right now, what I've been doing, and don't make fun of me, but I've been reading comic books. This is Frank Miller's Batman Year One. It is a classic Batman story about his first year being Batman. And the reason I started reading this is because I'm bored. My brain is fried from reading ancient texts and manuscripts and primary sources while working on my history degree. And I'm also studying history, or I'm studying theology, doing research for YouTube videos that I'm making. And I'm just always engaging with these dense, even things like this, Aristotle. I mean, this is like a really academic translation of Aristotle that I've been reading on and off, overloading my classes, being so busy reading 8 to 9 hours a day. My brain is just fried. So I started looking at comic books because they're just fun. You don't have to think that deeply. It's visual storytelling, which I think is important, right? You have visual storytelling, which is, I think, a good thing. A lot of stories are told in a visual way, and I think that's compelling and good for the brain. As I've been reading that, and I've been reading some of the original Spider-Man comic books, and not only comic books, but J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm always a big fan of J.R.R. Tolkien. This is The Children of Húrin, part of the wider legendarium of J.R.R. Tolkien. I think a story from the Silmarillion, but expanded into its own novel. There's so much more to how we understand the world than theology. We're just so, I think, theology focused in the Reformed tradition, or just in classical Christianity online, where we're reading Thomas Aquinas, and we're reading Augustine, we're reading Whitaker and Turretin and Calvin and Luther. We're just reading theology. And when you actually read fiction, or you read something as, new and maybe as silly and childish as maybe like a comic book, a superhero comic book, you, I think, start to realize that there's so much about fiction that teaches you truth about the world. People, I think, don't understand how things like this. This is a tragic tale told by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is set in a universe that doesn't exist, but in many ways, it's very, very true. It's more true than even the lives that we live sometimes, because J.R.R. Tolkien was so good at giving transparency to the human experience. If you just think about The Hobbit or the Lord of the Rings, Bilbo going on an adventure for the first time and exploring that sort of outside the comfort zone sort of thing, and all the other different characters. Or the ring in The Lord of the Rings being this sort of source of power and control that can be had by humans or other creatures, but ultimately it begins to corrode the soul the more you use it. Or even just Batman. Batman is an incredibly complex character, and you're exploring his kind of starting to understand himself and his role in Gotham City and cleaning up the streets of Gotham City. Is he an Avenger, Or is he a symbol of hope? And so much of his story is trying to explore that. Philosophy too, right? Like this is another thing that I think theologians, people who are really into theology are often very into philosophy as well. There are some things that I think Aristotle couldn't get across without a story. So Aristotle very much reads like a professor, kind of. It's almost like you're reading his class notes to his students. And so it's very technical, it's very dry. What we have of him as far as his writings are not well written, because I think scholars believe that he really just, what we have of him is his class notes. But if you read things like the Iliad and the Odyssey, or the Aeneid by Virgil, or what else? Beowulf. There are things that they can get across to you or teach you or show you about the human heart and the human condition, or just broadly living in this world, exploring different moral concepts that I don't think a professor can explain. I don't think a philosopher can just write down on a piece of paper unless you analyze it from the angle. Do you know what I mean? So that's why I think fiction is important. Read Harry Potter. Read The Lord of the Rings. Read comic books. Comic books are it's actually kind of amazing how deep they get into moral philosophy and the development of character and what different actions do to the human soul. It is really kind of remarkable how a simple story that's just pictures and dialogue can show you about humanity. So theologians online, don't be afraid of branching out, reading something or consuming some sort of media that might challenge you or add perspective to the theology and the philosophy that you're thinking about. Because honestly, at the end of the day, theology has to be understood in the context of the world that produced it, that it's responding to, that inspired it. And I think that you can't really understand theology in the way that someone like Carl Truman does, or the way that Michael Horton does, or even the way that Calvin and Luther and the church fathers did. These people not only understand theology and what Scripture says, but they also understand their culture really, really well. I mean, you read Calvin, and the guy read everything. I mean, he quotes, like, I don't think there's a classic book before his time that he had not read before ultimately writing this book right here. That's all I got for you today. I don't think a lot of people are going to end up watching this, but I just wanted to get something up and add some, well, get my thoughts out there that I've been thinking about. So I hope everyone has a great day, and look out Monday for possibly a response video. Have a good one.